as a high level talk, so to speak, because seriously,
Sure.
we'll probably fade into the green room as we do, but having you on is such an honor because I view you as somebody who really is one of the OG insiders. Don't let me forget asking you about psychedelics at the end as well.
Well, I feel the same about you, and you've done an incredible job on your end. So I guess we're both admiring each other.
Great. Hey, we're in the green room, and welcome to the green room, everybody. Listen, it's a unique week this week. I have an unbelievable guest in Dustin Robinson, Mr. Cannabis Law here in the state of Florida. Ruta's off. She's went to a wedding in Lithuania, actually. And, you know, Dustin, it's so great to have you. We actually have about 147 episodes in the can now of the green room. So Dustin and I were just talking before popping into the room. It's always been therapy for Ruta and I, because, you know, we always talk a little politics early on, and oh my God, do we need an attorney in the green room this week to talk about everything that's going on? And, you know, President Trump will be, you know, getting his mugshot done today. Don, did you see the mugshots, Giuliani's? Are you allowed to smile at a mugshot, Dustin? I guess
You could, but it's generally not a happy moment in anyone's life.
I don't think it is. You know, the joke that I wanted to make about you, of course, an attorney here in the state of Florida, has anyone reached out to you to represent anybody in any of the massive number of cases that, you know, former President Trump or any? No, I'm kidding you, because I know you don't do defense work necessarily, but I'm just thinking you wouldn't necessarily want to be a lawyer involved in any of those cases right now, right? I mean, I don't think any.
I'll be honest. I mean, you know, it's not such bad publicity for any attorney to be involved in a high profile case like that. But
it's true. And I think to a certain extent, if you can survive it, you know, and come out on the upside, you know, but it's tough because of Earth 1 and Earth 2. You may look great on Earth 1 and not necessarily, you know, over, you know, an Earth 2 world there, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, listen, we have Dustin Robinson with us today. And I want to promo a couple things first that you do, because I know you put out your periodic update, Mr. Wheatley Law, I think it is, because I just read it this morning, and we'll talk about it. It's not just the Florida focus that you bring, Dustin, but you really pay attention to everything going on cannabis all around the country. And of course, I know you have a new interest and focus in psychedelics, but let's just start in Florida, because, you know, the reason I really wanted to have you in this week is that, you know, with Ruta, you know, off, we can really take a couple deep dives into subjects that I know we can talk about that everybody wants to know about. For example, do you think the Supreme Court, okay, is going to deny smart and safe? And,
yeah.
you know, that's really important right now. We know that the state is, of course, opposed to it. You know, Ashley Moody came out with her 4 points of contention. I'm sure you read that, probably closer than most of us do because you have a legal mind to it. But what do you think about the state's stance? I thought one very capricious point that she made was that she's against this because she's protecting the rights of Floridians to possess more than 3 ounces, Dustin, should home grow ever come to play. So we know they don't want it, but she's protecting the rights of Floridians to possess more than, right? Wasn't that like crazy?
Yeah, there was a lot of crazy arguments. So, I mean, the Attorney General's brief is getting most of the attention, but there was actually multiple briefs filed. Florida Chamber of Commerce filed a brief. Drug Free America filed a brief. Then in support of Smart and Safe, you had the ACLU, Cato Institute, MMBA of Florida. So you had a lot of briefs. And so for a legal dweeb like me, I actually enjoyed reading through all the briefs. And I think a lot of people miss kind of the bigger picture about our individual liberties that are at risk in this case, right? One of the most fundamental rights we have is this ability to amend our constitutions. It's the check on the government, and the ACLU brief and the Cato Institute really do a really good job outlining how important our rights are. And that's why the Florida Supreme Court, the standard they apply in these cases is clear and conclusively defective, right? It needs to be clearly and conclusively defective. That's a very deferential standard. That's what they're supposed to apply. But the Attorney General is actually arguing for a different standard, right? So there's in court cases, there's always a standard, right? If there's strict scrutiny, that means the court's not applying any different deference. And that's usually if there's like a fundamental right at issue, right? If you're discriminating against someone in a law, they'll strictly scrutinize. Then there's lower levels of scrutiny. So in this instance, the court is supposed to apply a very deferential level of scrutiny. And there's really two bases for them to look at. There's the single subject rule, which the Attorney General actually doesn't even attack that, but other briefs do. And then there's the clarity rule. So essentially, what the Attorney General is doing is making 4 arguments for why it's not clear to Florida citizens. And, you know, I think that I think that the arguments, you know, that they're very fully briefed, and we could go into each argument if you'd like, but the ultimate
got to be single subject. That's what I thought was fascinating, is that she talked about the fact that there really wasn't a layout who would be able to sell it and this and that. And we know that it was just a very, and listen, I didn't read all the briefs, you know.
Well, the Florida Chamber of Commerce goes after the single subject rule, and that's, you know, I think it's a ridiculous argument that they make. Essentially, they're saying that the two subjects are decriminalization, but there's also commercialization, and really they're just the same. They're just different sides of the same coin, right? Like if you're going to decriminalize and allow people to possess and use, you got to make a mechanism for them to purchase it, right?
And listen, I mean, it's so fascinating, and it's a complete segue, although I still want to get your prediction of whether or not we're going to hit the ballot, because I think the Supreme Court has every motivation in the world trickling down from the governor himself to keep this off the ballot. You know, if you want to get partisan over it, I mean, the Republicans surely don't want Democratic boots on the ground going to the polls in 24, okay, on top of the abortion, you know, drive to the polls. You know, and I just think that's political, you know?
Yeah. So on the legal grounds, I think that the Florida Supreme Court should approve the amendment. However, there's always politics at play, and 5 of the 7 justices are DeSantis appointed. Now, look, in the court system, it's supposed to be, you know, there shouldn't be political drives in the judicial system. That's kind of what the judicial system is for. And that's why I mentioned this high deferential standard. They're not supposed to legislate from the court, from the bench. They're supposed to apply the law. And on a strict application of the law, I think that the amendment has a very high likelihood of getting passed. However, the politics and what's going on behind the scenes is hard to predict. So I give it a 70-30 likelihood in favor of it getting on the ballot. And I think we all know if it does get on the ballot, very, very, very high likelihood of it passing. They need 60% of the votes. I think, you know, right now the polling is showing around 70%.
How did we get to 60% in Florida? Because, you know, in Ohio, of course, they just tried to raise it, which required a vote of the people to go from 50 to 60. Wasn't that done legislatively here in Florida? How did we get that 60%? Or is that in a constitutional amendment from earlier? Do you know?
I don't know the mechanism, but I know there's been a lot of changes to the constitutional amendment process over the past several years. And, you know, in one of the briefs, they even talk about that the Florida Supreme Court has knocked down, like, you know, five of the 7 past amendments, whereas in the previous 5 years, they didn't knock down any proposed amendments, right? So what they're getting at in that brief is that the Florida Supreme Court is starting to take a more judicially active approach towards these constitutional amendments, and they really shouldn't. So constitutional amendments are like very, very core and fundamental to our democracy. So it's important that the Florida Supreme Court applies high deference to that. But, you know, and the state just keeps adding additional hurdles for these amendments as well.
No doubt. The number of signatures, who could be paid to collect, you know, all that. I mean, believe me, we've been fighting that up in Tallahassee, you know, over the past 3 to 4 years, you know. And if you go 70-30, Dustin, I say, hey, that's, you know, better than the Browns have a chance to win the Super Bowl this year. That's easy. Point is, I'm the opposite. I'm 30-70. I just see the political motivation. My point that I make to patients, and I can't wait to move on to the next topic because it segues right into it. There's two things I know whatever happens at the end of the sausage that's going to be legal adult use here in Florida. One is they're going to tax the hell out of it. I mean, you know that's just a given. So we have to fight in medical to make sure that we keep our taxes at zero as medicine. And the second thing that I remind people about, and they forget, is that they're going to restrict the quantity, okay? There is a 3-ounce cap in Smart and Safe for possession, of course, but that can be sausaged up in all kinds of different ways as the legislature puts together the program. But I remind people in medical, we have to fight for the quality of the product here in Florida. If we don't protect it, then we lose it because we've seen that happen in other states. And I want to segue right into it because the whole conversation is so interesting right now. And I'm going to shut up and let you talk because I can't wait to hear your opinion on what's going on with the hemp space here in Florida. So as we know right now, there's an entire hemp industry in Florida that now includes quote unquote hemp derived Delta-9 products being available pretty much everywhere in the non-MMTC market, in edibles, in gummy form. I don't think Delta-9 quite yet is in vape form in the smoke shops yet, but we know that HHC and O, even though they're illegal in Florida, they sneak onto the shelves, but Delta-8 is everywhere. So it just fascinates me that there's this entire unregulated, including milligram of oral, edible Delta-9 hemp-derived products, and we're still facing this significant restriction on the medical side. Where are we going with the hemp side? And by the way, and I read this in Mr. Wheatley Law. Once again, no, if you read it, then everybody should sign up for it. There was a quiet bill signed by the governor, right, Dustin, that restricted the advertising, okay, of recreational cannabis products, right?
Yes.
B is a broadside at the hemp market that you have to understand because all the Delta-8 products and all that, in general, they're being marketed as quote unquote recreational products. I mean, CBD, I think people are still trying to market on the medical side, but let's face it. I mean, the rest of the hemp world, if you're going to sell product, so I just view that as very interesting. And I know there was a background check change in that quietly signed law as well. So tell me about the hemp space.
Yeah. So you're referencing two different bills that were recently passed. One on the medical marijuana side, right? Medical marijuana is highly regulated, and essentially there's several changes made, but the main change is that they specified that none of the products that are sold, the medical marijuana products sold, cannot promote recreational use, and of course can't be attractive to children, which that part isn't so different. But it raises a very interesting question. That bill cannot promote recreational use, and what does that really mean? Because several of the brands that are in Florida, like Cookies, are nationally well known as cannabis, as recreational brands. So does that mean Cookies can't, put their brand on the product, right? So there's still a lot of questions. That bill, I think, created more questions than it did answers. But then on the hemp side, which is a separate bill, the challenge with Delta-8 and THCO and HHC, all these minor cannabinoids, is that they're really not very regulated and they are intoxicating, right? So you have this industry in Florida that's highly regulated on the medical marijuana side, but then you have this market that's not very regulated, but it still is intoxicating. So it kind of just doesn't make sense that we have this dichotomy going on right now. And what they did is they basically passed a bill that said that these products in the minor cannabinoid space, the hemp space, cannot be attractive to children. And once again, lots of vagueness around what is attractive to children. The definition mentions, stuff like can't show animals, can't do certain things like that. And I have dozens of clients that have animals in their logos. So does by just virtue of having an animal in your logo mean that it's attractive to children? I think that doesn't really make much sense. They even have humans. It's animals, humans, bright colors that, is in there, like, weird stuff, but it's also not written very clear. So right now the Department of Agriculture has to put rules, which will hopefully put some clarity. So they now came out with their proposed rules, and now they're in the commenting period. I imagine those rules will get changed quite a bit before they become final. But we're in but I think even going backwards, previous in the legislative session, there was a big push to actually ban Delta-8 and some of these other minor cannabinoids. And it was pretty wild the way the Delta-8 industry band together. I was on this WhatsApp chat that ended up having like thousands of people. It had to switch over to Telegram, and they were basically coordinating. And the ability of the industry to get together so quickly, they raised millions of dollars to lobby, and they were able to beat that bill. So I think this new bill is really a response to the fact that they couldn't get what they wanted done. So instead, what they got done is at least, putting other restrictions on it through this bill.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the hemp space survived an unbelievable bullet. And we follow this, of course. The original proposal was for a per piece cap at 0.5 milligrams, right, for all cannabinoids. And I think
Dr. Gordon, I have a question for you.
Sure.
What is you're the doctor. I personally, think that Delta-8 and these minor cannabinoids probably should be more regulated. We don't know much about them. I mean, look, I think that if I prefer everything to be much more unregulated, but you got to protect the consumer.
Right.
But if you have this market where medical marijuana that's highly regulated and high fees, and then you have this other industry, you're just having a misbalance in the free market. But I'm curious, from a medical perspective, what is your position with respect to these minor cannabinoids?
So there's certain things that you can regulate and control, and certain things that you can't regulate and control. What you can regulate and control, and I am in favor of this, is a central clearinghouse at the state level for every product that's being sold on a shelf in smoke shop, in gas station, God forbid, at flea market. Any product that's on a shelf has to be marked with a state seal that it's been tested to guarantee that if it's Delta-8, it is Delta-8, not Delta-9, mix, whatever other solvents could be left. It's got to be tested for quality and safety, right? And I just don't trust COAs. They're too easy to copy and paste these days. That's why I've never sold a CBD product or anything else in my office necessarily, because I think it's tough to source. It's not impossible to source. And Dustin, you know them. There are very many honest purveyors in the zone, no doubt about it. But to me, I think we need that. And listen, it may cost a little bit more to the consumer at the end point, and surely on the wholesale level, to have those products tested. But I think that's essential. And I don't think anybody can argue that. And you said it yourself, it's all about patient consumer safety. What you can't legislate is honesty, okay? What bugs me is the smoke shop guy or the CBD purveyor, that has a big Delta-8 sign out in front of their, shop. And then when the consumer and or patient walks in and says, hey, I thought you needed a card to buy THC, the purveyor says, well, all THCs are alike, okay? And go ahead and sell some Delta-8, okay? You can't legislate honesty, right? So you need the honest purveyors to educate, even in the smoke shop. Can't happen in the gas station, but in all the various venues, that there is a difference, right, in the cannabinoids, right? And I just get offended when we don't know about Delta-8. We really don't, because Delta-9's been used for generations, okay, by the shamans, by the medicine men. When they were looking for medicinal effect of cannabis, it was from THC and CBD and the other minor cannabinoids. Delta-8's always been so far down there. We don't know. There may be value to it, but I just don't put it in that family yet, Dustin, of researched and studied medicinal cannabinoids. So that's my point. If we're going to sell them, make sure it's safe, okay, and tested appropriately. And if you're going to sell them, please be honest about what it is that you're selling. I do take offense to doctor offices in Florida, and I call them out specifically for this. No doctor office in Florida should be selling their own white label Delta 8 product, okay, in Florida. And here's why.
Yeah.
Because you have same day availability to walk in to an MMTC right now and buy that quote unquote THC light effect by having a combination of THC and CBD product. And the good doctors know that if you have a patient that you want to have that effect, you just start on a heavier CBD and bring your THC in from the bottom. There's no reason to have Delta 8 right now in the medical setting until we know more about it medically. So that would be my long answer to it. But we need that state-sponsored clearinghouse. That actually came up 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. I can't believe how long ago. At a meeting with Holly Bell at breakfast that a lot of us cannabis advocates were at. You know, that's what AG wanted to do, at least if you believe, you know, what you heard at that meeting, was to have that central clearinghouse. I'll tell you one thing that bugs me, Dustin, and you spoke to it, about how the hemp space really rallied around, you know, their causes. Unfortunately, they've divided the cannabis space, in my opinion, here in Florida. When I say they, I don't know who I'm really referring to as they. Let's put it this way, events and the process has kind of divided the space. When I came into Florida 6 or 7 years ago, you know, I really didn't know anybody, but I saw a very unified cannabis space at that time. You know, we really didn't have that hemp, you know, medical cannabis split necessarily. You know, psychedelics, of course, weren't around yet either. So now, and I'm not faulting the fragmentation, in a lot of ways, it's a fantastic thing that we're learning more about other, you know, medicinal plants, right? But it's a different space now, you know, than it was then. And I think there's negatives to that. One thing that I wish we had in the medical cannabis space, and once again, a football analogy, the MMTCs have never been able to be together, okay, to lobby for their causes together as one voice. I've always said that the MMTCs need like a Roger Goodell, right? The NFL commissioner type that speaks for all of them, because they all do have common purposes and common goals, common concerns. But, you know, you go all the way back to the group of 7, you know, we started with 5, then there were a couple more. Those guys back then couldn't even get it together to discuss common sense, you know, things, much less the 13 or 14 we have now, with 22 more coming. Comment?
Yeah, there, you look, there was almost, I came, every industry generally has associations that lobby on behalf of their members, and this is like an industry that really needs like a unified voice. So there's a huge need for an association. I know very early on in the medical marijuana program, they tried to put something together, and apparently the CEOs just couldn't really get on the same page. And it's been very unfortunate. It's been super unfortunate for these licensees, because there's really a need for association. I've had a bunch of meetings where we've talked about, you know, potentially putting something together. And what's unfortunate is, like, you know, even on this recreational initiative, I mean, Trulieve is out there. They put up over $40 million, and they're looking to the other MMTCs like, hey, this is going to really benefit you. And apparently early on, some of those MMTCs said, like, look, we'll support it. But now, like, financially, a lot of them are struggling so much. And they're like, you know what? Trulieve's got a lot more money than us. We're just going to ride the coattails.
Yeah, let's go there, Dustin, because, you know, the half-hour green room goes so fast. But we have to get to this topic. So, and I know you've had, you know, a lot of contacts with a lot of the players coming in. 74 new applicants for the next quote unquote round of 22 licenses, give or take a couple here and there, I guess, to a certain extent. $146,000 non-refundable application fee, which is only the beginning, and it'll be the only attorney fee joke I make this entire green room, Dustin, and I do apologize for it. But seriously, anybody that's going to put a formal application right now in through the state is at least to $500,000 to $1 million for their application fee, when you get all the attorneys writing the, you know, this, that, whatever, everybody involved. You got to get your players involved. I'm on one app in Florida, Niram, actually, a company who Sue Sicily actually was their medical director in Arizona. And I figured that was good enough for me. So my goal is not to be their medical director, but I was happy to appear on their app. So if we have 74 applicants, Dustin, with 22 spots, you and I were yik-yakking a little bit before coming formally into the room. Aren't there going to be 54 people that are going to be pissed off for not getting approved? And of course, there's going to be lawsuits from that. As you said, they're already planning on it. So where are we going with the 22? How do you see the timing coming down? Do you have any insights on that? Any intel you can give us would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that Florida application process in April was probably the hardest I've worked in my life. It was 12 weeks of being seriously on the grind. It is no simple feat to try to draft one. Not the drafting actually isn't even the hard part. It's putting together all the infrastructure, the capital, financial modeling, the real estate. It's an incredible amount of work to do one of these applications. And you're absolutely right. You have to spend, if you're not spending at least $750K on the application, I just don't see how you would be competitive falling within the 22. But I think it's important for us to keep in mind in the first round, most of the people that got licenses got it through lawsuits, right? Now in this Pickford round, the losers sued. What did they do? They passed a bill that said if you had an application that met all the criteria, you're gonna get it. So it wasn't even, it turned out in the end, it wasn't even a competitive scoring. You just had to draft a qualifying application. So now in this round, you better believe that, to be in the top 22, you need to have spent 750 to over $1 million. I know groups that spend over $2 million on this application. I know groups that have started the build out and have spent over $5 million on this application. And so, but I think some groups are hoping, okay, maybe we don't need to draft such a good application. Maybe we don't need to spend $500 to $1 million because potentially there'll be a bill that lets us all get access to these. I don't think that, I think it'd be absolute craziness if, we had 74 licenses issued. So what I think is hopefully going to happen as far as like timeline, I'm expecting that we have the winners announced November or December. That will be the notice of intent to award. Sometime before the
Merry Christmas for somebody, obviously.
Yeah. Well, it's Merry Christmas, but it's also, it's just the beginning. The notice of intent to award is not the final award. So once they announce the 22 winners, what will happen is there will be lawsuits. It's not, maybe people will sue. There's going to be lawsuits. And the question is, how long will those lawsuits take? Hopefully, depends if you're on the winning side or the losing side, but hopefully on the winning side, I would expect people to lobby. And once again, this comes back down to like unified voice. I think the top 22 need their own, the two current 23 licenses, they need their own voice. I think this group of applicants, the winners, should probably have their own voice because they have different interests, right? And if I were them, what I'm talking about right now with several groups is lobbying in the next legislative session that if you won, give the 22 their license. Don't make them wait for this 3-year lawsuit. So hopefully a bill passes in the next legislative session, says if you won, we're going to give you your license. You get your license. What I think will ultimately happen with the settlement of the lawsuits is by the time those lawsuits are kind of decided, we're probably going to have another 100,000 patients, which means we need another 5 licenses anyway. So I think they'll pretty easily give away another 5 on top of that at some point. This might be, 18 months after they announce it. But I think it could potentially be a very long process. When you think about the Pickford litigation, we're already over 12 months past Pickford, and they're just starting to settle, who's getting the licenses for Pickford. And there was only 12 applicants in Pickford. Right. In this round, there's 74 applicants. So there's going to be over 50 losers. And it's going to be way more complicated to get all this stuff settled. So I think it could potentially take years. I'm crossing my fingers it doesn't, but it could potentially take several years to get these lawsuits settled.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's a mess. There are 2 new names on the OMU MMTC list as a result of Pickford. So, we're starting to see that type of stuff trickle out. My feeling and listen, it's interesting. Safe banking hasn't passed yet, of course. There's not easily funded, opportunities really in the cannabis world, so to speak. I don't know if the market, how many more MMTCs right now the medical market can, support, Dustin. And I think, of course, the holy grail is legal adult use. But there's only two things that I know about legal adult use. And I don't know if we talked about this before coming to the green room, or it's a double entendre in the green room. And I apologize if it is, but there's only two things that I know about legal adult use. They're going to tax the hell out of it, and they're going to restrict the amount of product that's available.
And
right?
by the way, one more thing you're not mentioning, they may also restrict the THC level.
Absolutely.
Recreational. So
Absolutely. And I've had this idea forever, and I call it green card, red card system, Dustin. That green card will be medical, no taxes, 50 milligram edible, no lines. Okay. Same MMTC over on the other side, similar to Colorado. Red card. Okay. Citizen card. Okay. Rec card. Okay. Always a line. Only a 10 milligram edible available. Doesn't mean you can't buy 5 of them and take 50 for an evening out if that's your desire, but it's going to cost you about 40 bucks over here on rec and about 12 bucks over here on medical.
Right? Yeah, another thing that they may require in a lot of states, the medical program starts to disappear with recreational. They may require, if you're an MMTC, yes, you could do adult use. That's written into the initiative, so they can't stop them. But a certain percentage of your dispensaries need to be serving medical, or in some way ensure that patients still have access to the medical market.
Of course. And the third thing would be, of course, taxes over on the rec side. I say that red card, Dustin, they're going to require, listen, the government we know wants two things. They want money and they want control. So on the money side, and listen, I take a lot of arrows for this, but I just talk logically of what I see coming at me politically. Why are they not going to require the citizen to get a $30 a year card, okay? Or the guy coming down from Ohio to Disney World for 2 weeks to get a $20 visitor card, okay? They're going to want to track the amount of product, okay, the consumer is purchasing. They're either going to upload per driver's license, or they can get revenue by, and I tack on, I want everybody coming down to Florida walking into a dispensary for cannabis. I want everybody to take a safe substance use class. I wanted to include alcohol. I wanted to include opiates. I wanted to include cannabis. I wanted to include everything.
About psychedelics.
And psychedelics, of course. Thank you so much for including that. I got to put that into my in my zone because it's important. And everybody should understand substances, right? Because listen, I'm an emergency doctor by training, and I always will be. And I'm always interested in that safety side of it, So at least you get some value maybe out of your card, But the thing is, the MMTCs are going to be over on the other side lobbying for the highest amounts and the lowest, restrictions on what the consumers can purchase. So I tell everybody in medical, our goal always has to be quality, always. And quality in medical means labeling. It means testing. It means knowing if it's a sativa that you want. You can see your terpene profiles and stuff like that. There is a difference. And then we need, and listen, I know we don't have time to discuss it. I got to get you back in the green room. We got to talk about job protections, right, in the workplace. We got to talk about the use of cannabis in the hospital and nursing home and an assisted living setting. Okay. We got to talk about a home grow option, which is Mariah Barnhart and Wise Florida's deal. Once again, an entire another green room. And I got about 8 other issues that they're all progressive issues that aren't going to happen in Florida right now. But I'm still glass half full guy, not glass half empty. And thanks to you, Dustin, and I mean it, and the strong work that many others have done in Florida prior to me being here and since also, we are moving the needle, and I appreciate that. Listen, give me a little update on what's going on psychedelics wise in that zone, because I know that a lot more on the East Coast of Florida than what we got going on over here. And just give us a couple promos for your sites and how people can keep in touch with what's going on with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my the psychedelic space, I have an investment fund, Eater Investments, eaterinvestments.com. That's ITER investments.com. That's where I do a lot of the work in the psychedelic space. I also have a nonprofit, MrPsychedelicLaw.com, that advocates for legal reform around psychedelics. Just really quick, kind of the big summary is from there. There's different approaches to psychedelics. There's pharmaceuticals, which is taking stuff through the FDA. Right now, MDMA for PTSD is probably going to get approved first half of 2024. A lot of people don't recognize that, so it's right around the corner. Then there's states that are passing legislation that is still federally illegal, much like cannabis. So, basically you have Oregon and Colorado that have passed their legal frameworks. Oregon is actually already serving people. Those are not medical. They're also not really recreational. It's kind of like an in-between approach. But then you have a lot of states that are also coming out with bills. I think that's going to start to proliferate. Then you have religious exemptions, which is starting to pick up a lot of heat. And then you have the Right to Try Act. So all those are kind of different legal frameworks, but they're all kind of progressing in their own way. Most of my work right now is really focused on the pharmaceutical side. But the state sanctioned frameworks are actually progressing much faster than I expected. My law firm website, Mr. Cannabis. Yeah, go ahead.
Better research in psychedelics than cannabis, right?
Oh yeah.
Research opportunities because it's not Schedule 1.
Well, no, they are. So psychedelics are Schedule 1. However, the way the industry is progressing is a lot of these universities have opened up psychedelic centers and started really pushing it forward on the research side. And they've demonstrated the safety of these compounds actually incredible. The Imperial College of London, Dr. David Nutt published a study several years ago comparing all the compounds, LSD, psilocybin, cannabis with caffeine, nicotine. And it's a chart that is just so eye-opening because all these other compounds that are legal, like alcohol and nicotine, have a way higher likelihood for abuse compared to things like psilocybin, LSD, cannabis. And now the FDA is recognizing that, and they're actually fast-tracking some of these pharmaceutical compounds past phase 1. Phase 1 of clinical trials is it's really about the safety of the compound. You get into efficacy in phase 2 and phase 3. And the FDA is recognizing, wow, we have such a long history and so much research now demonstrating the safety of these compounds. Phase 1 is pretty much, not even a challenge for some of these psychedelic compounds.
It's interesting to see what goes on if they pop cannabis into 2 or 3, and how
they're talking about Biden. The Biden administration has been talking about it. I don't know. I'm very skeptical.
I'm very fearful of it, and we'd have to get a lot of that safety data, assumed as well to get a lot of the nonsense that can occur if they really try to restrict programs that have already gone far beyond that. People follow you, website, weekly.
Yeah.
Yep.
MrCannabisLaw.com is my website. My IG handle, DustinR10. Like I mentioned, my investment fund is EaterInvestments.com. My nonprofit, MrPsychedelicLaw.com. So yeah.
Do you represent like workers that have wrongs, done secondary to cannabis and all that type of stuff, Dustin? I know you have a couple different divisions within your zone, right? So you can surely represent those that have cannabis-related traffic and or otherwise issues here in the state.
Yeah, most of my work is done with
the main part of the practice, so to speak.
Yeah. Most of my stuff is done on the business side. So, corporate structuring, real estate, licensing, compliance. But, there is a lot of, employees that get terminated for their medical marijuana cards. We have represented employees in that situation. So, gun rights is another issue. So yeah, there are individual kind of liberties at play. The reality is a lot of the times those individuals aren't really willing to take the steps to really fight it. The businesses kind of have a business interest and a pecuniary interest in pushing things forward. So it's somewhat there's not as many cases for a lawyer with respect to those things because those people aren't really willing to push them forward. But no, we've had successful outcomes with employees that have been terminated, and that could be a whole other green room. But it's a tough situation with employees that are using medical marijuana.
It's a step-by-step process. And, once again, I'm glass half full guy, but, with people like you, and once again, we all pull on the rope together, working together. And I know, changes will occur, but it's so great to have you in, Dustin. And we do. We'll invite you back. And I know you're busy and I so much appreciate your time. And, as every ER doctor in the world knows, I always try to avoid attorneys, but when you need one, you want to have one like that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate you having me on. Anytime you want me back, I'm happy to get back on.
Stay in touch. We'll see you soon.
Have a good one. Thank you.
All right, everybody. We'll see